What if I told you that even the strongest person in history, someone chosen by God, gifted with supernatural strength, was completely destroyed by one weakness? It wasn't an army that defeated him. It wasn't a sword, a spear, or a battlefield. It was a woman. But not just any woman. A deceiver, a manipulator, someone who pretended to love him but was only after one thing. And Samson, yes, the mighty Samson, the warrior of Israel, fell for it. This is one of the most tragic stories in the Bible. A man with limitless potential, ruined by his inability to see the truth. His physical strength was unmatched, yet his emotional weakness was his downfall. And the most chilling part? The warning in Samson's story is not just for him, it's for us. Because in life, destruction doesn't always come through brute force. Sometimes it comes through soft whispers, false affection, and deception wrapped in the disguise of love. How many times have we ignored red flags in relationships? How often have emotions blinded us to the truth? How many of us have been caught in the trap of lust, manipulation, and deception? Just like Samson. Maybe you've trusted someone who didn't have your best interest at heart. Maybe you've given your heart to someone who only saw you as an opportunity. Maybe you felt the sting of betrayal from the very person you thought would always be there for you. Samson's story is not just an ancient tale. It's a reflection of what many people go through today. And what happened to him serves as a chilling warning to those who let their emotions rule over wisdom. Because here's the truth. Strength means nothing if your heart is in the wrong hands. The Bible gives us this story to teach us, to warn us about trusting the wrong people, about ignoring wisdom, about letting lust and emotions cloud our judgment. Because if it could happen to Samson, it could happen to you. Stay with me as we dive deep into this powerful biblical account, breaking down every moment of Samson's tragic mistake. We will uncover what truly led to his downfall, how Delilah deceived him, and the hidden lesson that could save you from making the same mistake. But before we begin, if you find value in videos like this, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss powerful biblical insights that can strengthen your faith. Alright, let's get into it. Samson was no ordinary man. His birth was a miracle, his strength was legendary, and his purpose was divine. From the moment he was born, God had set him apart. His mother, unable to conceive, was visited by an angel who told her that she would bear a son, a deliverer for Israel. But there was one condition. Samson must take a Nazirite vow. A Nazirite vow meant three things. He could never drink wine, never touch anything unclean, and never cut his hair. As long as he obeyed these commands, God's power would flow through him. And for years, it did. With God's strength, Samson tore apart a lion with his bare hands. He slayed 1,000 Philistines using nothing but a donkey's jawbone. He carried the massive gates of Gaza on his shoulders, walking for miles with them as if they were weightless. He was feared. He was invincible. He was chosen. But for all his strength, Samson had a fatal flaw, a weakness that would undo everything. He let his emotions lead him. Again and again, Samson fell for the wrong women, women who worshipped other gods, women who had no love for his calling. He ignored every warning, and then he met Delilah. The Philistines had one goal: destroy Samson. He had humiliated them too many times, and they knew they couldn't beat him in battle, but they had studied him. They knew his habits, and most of all, they knew his weakness. Samson had been reckless with love before, and now they had found the perfect tool to take him down, a woman who could manipulate him. Her name was Delilah. We don't know much about her past, but we do know her heart was not with Samson. Because when the Philistine leaders came to her and offered 1,100 pieces of silver from each ruler, a fortune beyond imagination to betray Samson, she did not hesitate. This was not a woman in love. This was a woman on a mission, and her mission was to break Samson. But she wasn't like the other women he had been with. She didn't argue. She didn't push him away. She played the long game. She made him feel safe. She whispered sweet words. She acted like she adored him. She wrapped herself around his pride, his desires, his emotions, and when he was completely comfortable, she set the trap. One evening, Delilah turned to Samson and gently asked, Tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued." This was a blazing red flag. Any man with discernment would have asked, "Why would the woman who loves me want to know how to make me weak?" But Samson didn't question it. He played along. He laughed and said, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." That night, while Samson slept, Delilah tied him up with fresh bowstrings. She had Philistine soldiers hiding in the next room. Then she called out, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." Samson snapped the bowstrings as if they were nothing. The Philistines fled. Delilah acted shocked, hurt, betrayed. "You made a fool of me," she cried. "Tell me the real secret." At this moment, Samson should have left. He should have walked away. But he stayed, and he played the game again. "If I am tied with new ropes that have never been used, I'll become weak," he told her. And once again, Delilah tied him up while he slept. And once again she cried, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." And once again he broke free. This should have been the final warning sign. But Delilah wasn't done. She turned up the pressure. Delilah didn't just ask. She begged. She wept. She guilt-tripped him. She made him feel like he was the bad guy for not trusting her. "If you truly loved me," she whispered, "you would tell me the truth." And this is where so many people fall, not just Samson. How many have been guilt-tripped into bad relationships? How many have been manipulated into trusting the wrong person? How many have given their heart to someone who only pretended to care? Delilah didn't love Samson. She loved what she could get from him. But Samson was blind to it. Because lust is blinding. Because desire can drown out wisdom. Because when we let emotions rule, we repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Samson could have walked away. Samson could have seen the trap. Samson could have run back to God. But instead, he stayed. And he let Delilah wear him down. Delilah wasn't going to stop. She had come too far, and the reward was too great. Day after day, night after night, she wore Samson down. With every passing moment, she whispered, pleaded, cried. She played with his emotions, twisting his heartstrings like a puppet master. "You don't really love me," she sighed. "If you did, you'd trust me." Manipulation at its finest. Samson's strength had defeated armies. He had stood alone against thousands. But against Delilah's persistence, he crumbled. He had resisted before. But this time, he was tired, weary, exhausted from the constant pressure. And in a moment of weakness, he finally broke. "Fine," he said. And then, he spoke the words that would seal his fate. "My strength has nothing to do with my muscles. It comes from a covenant with God. I was dedicated to Him from birth. If my hair is cut, I will lose my strength and be like any other man." Delilah's eyes glowed with victory. She had him. This time, she didn't wait. She let him fall asleep in her lap, his head resting in the arms of his betrayer. Did Samson feel safe? Did he have even the slightest suspicion that this might be the last time he would wake up as the man he once was? Or was he so consumed by love, by lust, that he was blind to the truth? As he slept, Delilah called for a man to come in quietly, and with every slow, deliberate movement of the blade, Samson's identity was shorn away. With each snip, the covenant was broken. With each snip, his strength faded. With each snip, he became just like any other man. And when it was done, Delilah leaned in, gently shook him and whispered, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." He woke up, expecting to fight. Like before, he jumped to his feet, expecting power to surge through his body. But something was different. He swung his arms, expecting to feel the presence of the Lord. But nothing came. He tried to break free, but his hands felt weak. He tried to stand firm, but his legs trembled beneath him. For the first time in his life, Samson was powerless. And then, a horrifying realization. The Lord had left him. Not just his strength, not just his power. God's presence was gone, and he didn't even know it. What a terrifying thought, that a person could fall so deep into sin, into deception, that they don't even realize when God has left them. The Philistines stormed in. This time, Samson didn't fight back. He couldn't. They tackled him, bound him in chains, and laughed as they dragged him away. The great warrior, reduced to a prisoner. The hero of Israel, now a slave to his enemies. But the Philistines weren't done. They wanted revenge. They wanted him to suffer. So they took him to their city, forced him down, and gouged out his eyes. Samson, the man who had once seen clearly, was now blind. But let's be honest, he had been blind for a long time. Blind to the warnings, blind to the manipulation, blind to his own weakness. Now, it was literal, and maybe that was the only way Samson would finally see. They chained him up in a Philistine prison, forcing him to grind grain like an ox. A warrior reduced to slavery. A leader reduced to nothing. The strongest man in history, now a joke to his enemies. This was the cost of ignoring wisdom. This was the price of trusting the wrong person. He had been handpicked by God for greatness, but because he chose lust over wisdom, because he chose emotion over discernment, because he chose Delilah over God, he lost everything. But let me ask you, did Samson deserve this? Was his mistake so unforgivable that he would never again find redemption? Would God still listen to him? Or was this it? The end of Samson? That's what the Philistines thought. That's what everyone thought. But God wasn't finished yet, because in the darkness, something stirred. Samson sat in darkness. The mighty warrior, once feared by his enemies, was now a prisoner. Broken, humiliated, forgotten, the grindstone turned beneath his hands, day after day, as he pushed like an animal. His muscles, once filled with divine power, ached from exhaustion. His feet shuffled in the dirt, his eyes, now empty sockets, saw nothing. And yet, something was happening. His hair was growing back. The Philistines didn't notice. They thought they had won. They thought the story of Samson was over. But they had forgotten one thing. God is a God of second chances. Samson had lost everything because of his choices. His lust, his arrogance, his lack of discernment, they had cost him dearly. He had been blinded not just physically but spiritually long before that. He had ignored the warnings. He had played with fire and been burned. But even in the consequences of his own failure, God had not abandoned him. That's the part of the story many people miss. Samson had been chosen by God, and when God calls someone, he doesn't take it back. Even when they mess up, even when they fall, even when they throw away everything they were meant to be. The Philistines had one last celebration, a great feast in the temple of their false god Dagon. Thousands gathered, cheering, drinking, mocking the God of Israel. And at the center of their humiliation stood Samson, blind, weak, chained, a joke. They brought him out to entertain them, to parade him around as a symbol of their victory. They laughed, they spit, they cursed the God who had once given him strength. But as they jeered, Samson whispered something, a prayer. Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more. He reached out, feeling the pillars that held up the temple. His fingers traced the stone. He took a deep breath. Let me die with the Philistines. And then he pushed. The ground trembled. The pillars cracked. The ceiling groaned under its own weight. And in an instant, everything collapsed. The temple came crashing down, crushing the Philistine rulers, the mockers, the enemies of God. And in his final act, Samson killed more Philistines in his death than he had in his entire life. His life had been marked by mistakes. He had been reckless, foolish, arrogant, but in the end, he turned back to God. And in that moment, his purpose, his true calling, was fulfilled. This is where the lesson becomes clear. It wasn't Samson's hair that gave him strength. It wasn't his muscles. It wasn't even his vow. It was God. And when Samson humbled himself and turned back to the one who had called him, his strength returned. This story is a warning, but also a message of hope. Some people will hear this and recognize themselves. Maybe you've ignored the warnings. Maybe you've put your trust in the wrong person. Maybe you've let lust, emotion, or arrogance lead you away from God's plan for your life. Maybe Like Samson, you feel like you've lost everything. But here's the truth. God isn't finished with you. Samson's failure wasn't the end of his story, and yours doesn't have to be either. No matter how far you've fallen, no matter how much you've lost, God is still calling you. And if you turn back to Him, if you humble yourself, if you pray like Samson did, He will strengthen you again. Don't let lust steal your destiny. Don't let manipulation lead you into destruction. Don't let your emotions dictate your choices. Instead, seek wisdom, seek God's voice, and trust that He has better for you. Because when you put your trust in Him, your story isn't over. Samson's story didn't end in defeat. Yes, he fell. Yes, he made mistakes. Yes, he lost everything. But in the end, he returned to God. And when he did, his purpose was fulfilled. That's the key. It's not about how strong you were in the beginning. It's not about how much you've lost. It's about where you turn when you realize you've fallen. Maybe you see yourself in Samson's story. Maybe you've ignored the warnings. Maybe you've trusted someone who is never for you. Maybe you've allowed emotions, lust, or pride to take control of your life. Maybe you feel like you've gone too far, like you've messed up so badly that there's no way back. But let me tell you something. As long as you have breath in your lungs, your story is not over. God is still calling you. He's still waiting for you to turn back to Him. And when you do, He will restore you. He will give you strength. He will redeem what was lost. Your past does not disqualify you. If Samson, after everything he did, could be used by God one last time, then so can you. The enemy wants you to believe it's too late, that you've failed beyond redemption, that there's no hope for you. But that's a lie, because God specializes in using broken people for great things. Look at David. He messed up big time, and yet God called him a man after His own heart. Look at Peter. He denied Jesus 3 times, yet God used him to build the early church. And look at Samson, a man who threw away his gift, but in his final moment, he turned back to God and fulfilled his mission. Your mistakes do not erase God's plan for your life, but you have a choice. Will you keep going down the wrong path, ignoring the warnings, or will you turn back before it's too late? Samson's warning is clear. Don't trust the wrong people. Don't let emotions blind you. Don't trade your calling for temporary pleasure. But His redemption is just as clear. Even when you fall, God's grace is bigger than your mistakes. So if this spoke to you today, don't ignore it. Take a moment and reflect. And if this message blessed you, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss biblical insights that can strengthen your faith. And before you go, drop a comment below. What stood out to you the most about Samson's story? Let's talk about it. Thank you for watching, and remember, your story isn't over.